Okay, let's jump right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack a pretty fascinating and honestly incredibly relevant clash. We're looking at the collision between big political ambitions and, well, harsh economic math. Right now, the UK is standing at this massive financial crossroads. On one hand, you've got Prime Minister Andy Burnham. He came into office back in July with this really clear, resonant promise to give you, everyday citizens, some much-needed breathing space from this grueling cost of living crisis. But on the other hand, we've got a national bank account facing some absolutely severe macroeconomic headwinds. So today, we're going to explore this central tension. We'll look at the expectations set by this new political leadership versus the cold, hard reality of the upcoming autumn budget. And crucially, we'll figure out what this high-stakes balancing act actually means for your own wallet.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with pledges for the people, then move into finding the funding, and examine the economic reality. After that, we're pivoting to what businesses need, and finally wrapping up with the autumn budget choice. Basically, we're mapping the whole picture, from local bus fares all the way to global economic pressures.
All right, Section 1, Pledges for the People. Let's look at those early wins aimed right at the cost of living.
When Prime Minister Burnham first stepped into office, he didn't wait around. He immediately rolled out these specific commitments. We're talking about capping bus fares at just £2 and cutting the VAT on household electricity bills. These are really tangible, immediate actions, right? They're designed to literally leave a little extra cash in your pocket at the end of the month. Burnham himself actually called these the first steps he felt he could take to give families that promised breathing space. It sets a very clear, supportive expectation for the public. But, that leads us directly to a pretty massive follow-up question.
Which brings us to Section 2, Finding the Funding. If a government wants to step up and spend more to help citizens out, where exactly does that money come from?
Here's the thing to remember. A government's budget really isn't all that different from your own household budget. You only have so much money in the pot. If you're going to spend more in one area, you've got to spend less in another. So to fund these new priorities, like the £2 bus fares and the VAT electricity cuts, they had to look at what could be sacrificed. Early on, Burnham decided that the digital ID project, just not the top priority right now. So the funding for digital ID was reprioritized. It was essentially paused, and that money got moved over to cover this immediate cost of living relief. It's a direct trade-off.
Now, to really understand this approach, it helps to look at the Prime Minister's track record. As he recently told ITV, he ran Greater Manchester for a decade with a tight ship and rock-solid finances. He's sending a very specific message here to both the public and the financial markets. He's vowing not to take risks with people's jobs, their livelihoods, or their family finances. He absolutely wants to help, but he insists that whatever he does is going to be carefully thought through and, most importantly, fully funded. But despite all this careful maneuvering, there's a storm brewing just offshore.
That takes us into Section 3, the economic reality. This is where the macroeconomic storm collides with those political expectations.
Okay, 2.9%. This is a vital number to wrap our heads around. This was the UK's inflation figure in July. Now, you might be thinking, hey, 2.9% doesn't sound astronomical, right? But context is literally everything here. This figure actually hit a 4-month high in July. And what's even more concerning for the government is that experts expect it to climb even further. This rising inflation, it actively eats away at the exact breathing space the government is trying so hard to create for households. Let's break down the external storms driving this harsh reality. First off, look at July's borrowing. Official figures showed the government actually borrowed more than expected in July. And paradoxically, this happened despite it being a record month for income tax receipts. So the money coming in is super high, but the money going out is somehow even higher. Second, we've got the geopolitical situation. The ongoing impacts of the Iran war are directly hitting global energy prices and fuel costs, which of course ripples down to everything from transportation to manufacturing. And third, like we just saw, that inflation trend is stubbornly marching upward. When you stack all these pressures together, it becomes incredibly obvious why the government is rapidly running out of financial wiggle room. The UK's bank account is under some intense pressure.
And to make matters even tighter, the government's hands are actually tied by their own regulations. I'm talking about the fiscal rules, which were originally set by former Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Both PM Burnham and current Chancellor John Healey have publicly vowed to stick to them. These rules act as a really strict financial mandate. Essentially, day-to-day government spending must be funded entirely through tax revenue by the end of the Parliament, and overall debt has to be reduced as a proportion of GDP. So, what does this mean in plain English? It means simply borrowing more money to get out of this tight spot is completely off the table. The math absolutely has to balance.
Moving on to Section 4, what businesses need. We've talked a lot about households and the government, but what about the private sector? These macroeconomic trends we just unpacked, they are hitting job creators incredibly hard. Rain Newton-Smith, she's the chief executive of the Confederation of British Industry, or CBI, recently sounded the alarm on the Today program. She pointed out that business owners desperately want to create opportunities, especially for young people, but the sheer cost of employing people has just skyrocketed. This steep friction of high employment costs, combined with general inflation, is acting like a massive roadblock to private sector growth, and obviously that ultimately impacts job availability and wage growth for everyday folks.
But the CBI isn't just complaining. They're proposing a solution, and it's a pretty interesting angle for the government to consider. They argue that if the government provides targeted support to businesses right now, it will organically create growth. That growth leads to more hiring, which then saves the government money on social support down the line. And, crucially, it leads to higher tax receipts in the future. It's basically the idea that helping businesses now will grow the very tax pie the government so desperately needs to fund those household pledges. Which brings our explainer to Section 5, the autumn budget choice. All of these competing forces are hurtling toward one single date on the calendar.
Because of those strict fiscal rules we talked about and the total lack of room for extra borrowing, experts are warning that PM Burnham and Chancellor Healey are essentially trapped. They are facing a stark, binary choice for the upcoming October 28th budget. To make this math work, they literally must either raise taxes or cut spending elsewhere. That's it. There is no secret third option to magically print more money without breaking their own rules. If they want to keep rolling out cost of living support as they promised, that cash has to be extracted from one of these two columns.
And that brings us to the ultimate question on everyone's mind. Will taxes actually go up? See, despite genuinely wanting to help families and promising that breathing space, Prime Minister Burnham is refusing to rule out tax rises. Speaking recently during a visit to Ukraine, he stated bluntly that he won't be unrealistic and that people really need to understand the challenging position the public finances are in right now. When reporters pushed him on whether the public needed to just accept tax hikes, he said they wouldn't necessarily have to, but he notably left that door wide open. He only promised that whatever he does will be carefully thought through.
So, that leaves us right here, the tightrope of October 28th. The government is attempting this incredible high-wire balancing act, trying to deliver on the expectation of household breathing space, all while being weighed down by the reality of macroeconomic storms and the absolute necessity of rock-solid national finances. Burnham has hinted there'll be more to come in the autumn to help people, but exactly who is going to pay for it? Well, that remains the multi-billion-pound question. As we watch this all unfold, ask yourself this. When forced to choose between breaking promises to the public or breaking promises to the markets, which way will the government fall? It's a massive economic puzzle and one we're going to be watching very, very closely. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.